Up until the beginning of 2014, I had been doing my BSc part-time. I am now doing it full-time, and as such, I have barely had any time to make these documentaries. As testament to that, this video that you are watching now I had begun producing back in June 2014. Yep, June 2014. Back before I switched over to high definition. So I apologize in advance for taking a step back from my now typical 1080i format. Regrettably, some of the news in this video is now a bit outdated. But although SpaceX is still tight-lipped on their Mars proposal, the latest news has added yet more vindication to my educated guesses. Around the time I began work on this video, the Falcon 9R development vehicle achieved altitudes as high as 1 kilometer, and on April 18, 2014, on their then latest launch of the Dragon spacecraft, SpaceX for the second time returned the spent first stage of their new Falcon 9 version 1.1 rocket back to Earth via propulsive landing. Although the rocket landed in the sea, it paved the way for future plans to have the spent stages return to the launch pad via propulsive landing. 2 weeks later, Elon Musk posted on his Twitter account that on May 29, 2004, he would unveil the Dragon version 2, the man-rated version of Dragon.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Obviously, this craft looks a lot sleeker than the original Dragon, but this is not just a cosmetic upgrade. As part of the unveiling, Musk played a computer animation showing how this Dragon works. From the establishing shots, it seems that instead of sprouting solar panels, the solar panels are essentially the outer hull of the trunk. Also, it seems Musk wasn't kidding when he said nothing is thrown away. On the original Dragon, the docking mechanism and top hatch were covered by a protective nose cone that jettisons after attaining orbit. On Dragon 2, it seems this nose cone is retractable. It opens and closes, exposing the docking equipment. But the main attraction would have to be the Dragon's ability to sprout legs and make propulsive landings back to the Earth using the Super Draco launch abort engines.
From a propulsion standpoint, the biggest single change for Dragon version 2 is the addition of the Super Draco engines. So this is really a super-powered version of the Draco engine, whereas the Draco engine produces about 100 pounds of thrust. Each of these engines produce 16,000 pounds of thrust. So, hence the super. And they're in pairs so that if one malfunctions, its pair can take over and increase thrust to compensate for the one that's not firing. And each one is in a protective shell, so if anything goes wrong, it's contained within that protective nacelle. This is also will be the first fully printed engine. So this is it's printed Inconel, which is a special high-strength alloy, and it'll be, yeah, like I said, the first time that a printed rocket engine sees flight. Although it wasn't shown in the video, Dragon version 2 still retains the parachutes of Dragon version 1, so that what it'll do is when it reaches a particular altitude, just before landing, a few miles before landing, it will test the engines, verify that if all the engines are working, it will then proceed to a propulsive landing. If there's any anomaly detected with the engines or the propulsion system, it will then deploy the parachutes to ensure a safe landing, even in the event that the propulsion system is not working. And even after starting the propulsion system, it can afford to lose up to 2 engines and still land safely. And then after the engines are started, it deploys the landing legs for a soft landing. And so the reason that this is really important, apart from the convenience of the landing location, is that it enables rapid reusability of the spacecraft. So you can just reload propellant and fly again. This is extremely important for revolutionizing access to space. Because as long as we continue to throw away rockets and spacecraft, we will never have true access to space. It'll always be incredibly expensive. You can imagine a scenario where in aircraft, if aircraft were thrown away with each flight, that nobody would be able to fly, or very few, maybe a small number of government customers, and the same is true of rockets and spacecraft. So that's really why it's so important to be able to land propulsively, land on land, and be able to then reload propellant and take off again. So that's Dragon version 2. Although it'd be nice to go inside. But for that, we will need a comically fast set of stairs. So have a settle. So I'm sitting here in the pilot seat. And pull it down. So we've aimed for something with the Dragon version 2 for the interfaces and for the overall aesthetic of something that's very clean, very simple, and so as the pilot, you were able to interact with the screens overhead, control the spacecraft, and then we've got all of the critical functions that are needed in an emergency situation as manual buttons. So that's what you see in this area here. Yep. Yeah. Oh. All right, that's all a lot easier in zero-G, by the way.
Here is a close-up of what Musk calls the manual controls. It seems that it comprises of little more than a timer, power override and power reset buttons, as well as buttons to release the chutes and trunk. Those are all the actual controls. Quite a contrast from the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, or even the Shuttle. Then again, all 4 of those vehicles were 1960s technology. It seems all the main spacecraft controls will be accessed via touchscreens. My first thought was, what happens during transit of the South Atlantic anomaly, or when a solar flare comes up? Well, touchscreen computers, like iPads or Windows 8 tablets, generally used microprocessors, silicon-based electronics, which John Malden writes are somewhat hardy against radiation. So that should keep the computers and spacecraft electronics safe during solar flares or transit of the Van Allen radiation belt. But humans would still need to transfer to a radiation shelter. That's easily rectified. As you may recall, docked with a radiation shelter module and living quarters, the Dragon would weigh 131 tons. Sending it to the moon would require a single launch of the Falcon 20 Heavy, while a Mars mission would require 2 rockets, one to lift the Manda stack and one to lift the Earth departure stage. Now, at the time when I first made those educated guesses, the largest rocket SpaceX had ever proposed was Falcon 20. The Falcon 20 Heavy has always been a concept that myself, and apparently some other space enthusiasts, had theorized as SpaceX's next logical step after Falcon 20. Because as was the case with the Falcon 9 Heavy, strapping on 2 additional first stages roughly triples the lifting capacity of one core. At least, that's what was initially thought. Originally, the Falcon 9 Heavy was to lift 32 metric tons. Now it seems it will lift up to 53 metric tons, or about 5 times the lifting capacity of one Falcon 9 core. Now, the Falcon 20 was first unveiled during an August 6, 2010 presentation by SpaceX's Tom Markusek. This slide from that presentation indicates that the rocket has a lifting capacity of 140 metric tons, will use 6 Merlin 2 LOX kerosene engines, and that one core is 10 meters wide. Later in 2012, Elon Musk and SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell announced plans for a new super heavy rocket capable of lifting up to 200 metric tons and propelled by their LOX Methan Raptor engines.
I can confirm that the name of the engine is Raptor.
Okay.
And I'd like to announce maybe some details about the engine next year.
Okay.
But perhaps what's even more interesting is the spaceship that's attached to.
At the time of this announcement, their overall strategy went from clear-cut to seemingly very murky and convoluted, leaving us on the outside to try and piece together a jigsaw puzzle with the limited number of pieces they had supplied. But now, I am 100% convinced that this rocket, with a 200-ton lifting capacity, is in fact Falcon 20, upgraded from a kerosene rocket to a methane rocket. I figured it out in March of 2014, when NASA Spaceflight.com published an article titled SpaceX Advances Drive for Mars Rocket via Raptor Power. The article opens with this statement. SpaceX co-founder and Vice President of Propulsion Development, Tom Mueller, has revealed the company is deep into the development of the first full-flow methane liquid oxygen rocket engine. Known as the Raptor, 9 of these immensely powerful engines, on 1 or 3 cores, will be utilized to send SpaceX's Super Heavy Lift Launch Vehicle, SHLV, uphill on missions to Mars. Note the choice of words, 1 or 3 cores, like, say, the Falcon 20 Heavy that I theorized? Speaking of the Falcon 20, the article makes a brief passing mention of Markusek's 2010 presentation, reminding us that the Falcon 20 core is 10 meters wide. The article then goes on to say, Mr. Mueller confirmed 9 of these engines would power each 10-meter diameter core of the notional MCT. I assume by MCT they mean the launch vehicle for the MCT. MCT, or Mars Colonial Transporter, is the spacecraft. More on that in a moment. In the long run, it seems the MCT launcher is essentially the Falcon 20, albeit with 9 Raptor engines instead of 6 Merlin 2 engines. But don't just take my word for it, listen to this interview with Gwynne Shotwell.
When you remodel 39A, what rockets are you going to fly off of there?
Both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. They'll both go from there.
Now, the rockets I'm seeing that are attributed to SpaceX, like XX and others, where would they fly from?
Oh, you mean the Mars?
Yeah, the really big ones.
The big ones?
Uh-huh.
You know, we haven't selected a site for those yet.
Note how as soon as the host asks about Falcon 20, or XX as he calls it, Shotwell immediately responded with, oh, you mean the Mars, the big ones?
The rockets I'm seeing that are attributed to SpaceX, like XX and others, where would they fly from?
Oh, you mean the Mars?
Yeah, the really big ones.
The big ones?
Uh-huh.
Later in the same interview, she says that the MCT launcher doesn't have a name yet. But from my chair, it looks to me like she just slipped up on radio and admitted it right then and there. And it seems 3 of these cores will be strapped together, just as I had anticipated. So, if one of these cores can lift 200 metric tons to Earth orbit, then 3 of these cores could get 600 tons to Earth orbit. That's the most probable estimate. On the other hand, if strapping on 2 extra cores multiplies the lifting capacity by 4.55 times, as is the case with Falcon 9 Heavy, then the Falcon 20 Heavy could lift 910 metric tons to Earth orbit. But why stop at 3 cores? The most elaborate proposal for a heavy-lift rocket that I've ever heard of was Vladimir Shalomov's UR-700M proposal, a massive hypergolic rocket that would have dwarfed the Saturn V. The design had 7 large booster stages strapped around a much larger first stage. So, what if we were to strap on 7 additional first stages around the Falcon 20? Doing so, depending on whether strapping on 2 extra cores triples or quintuples the lifting capacity, I estimate a lifting capacity between 1,600 metric tons and 2,427 metric tons. Hey, don't laugh. I suspect that Musk might be planning something as elaborate as that. In an interview, Musk stated that he aimed to make rockets that would, quote, make the Saturn V look small.
We need to develop a much larger vehicle, which would be the sort of what I call kind of the Mars Colonial transport system. This would really be, we're talking about rockets, bigger scale than has ever been done before. It'd make the Apollo moon rocket look small, and they would have to launch very frequently as well. That's what's needed in order to ultimately send millions of people and millions of tons of cargo to Mars, which is the minimum level to have a self-sustaining civilization on Mars.
Until SpaceX officially unveils this rocket, I'll be sticking with the lower ends of my estimates. That gives us 200 metric tons for the Falcon 20, 600 metric tons for the Falcon 20 Heavy, and 1,600 metric tons for the Falcon 20 Ultra Heavy? I can't really call it a Super Heavy, because Falcon 20 Classic is already a Super Heavy rocket. In any case, the stack that I propose could easily be lifted into Earth orbit by a Falcon 20, and a Falcon 20 Heavy could lift the Earth departure stage. The Falcon 20 Ultra Heavy could lift both the stack and the Earth departure stage in one go. However, my strategy considers a crew of 7 people. Recently, Elon Musk announced that the MCT will have a crew that is considerably larger.
Ultimately, the craft that we're trying to design, it needs to be capable of taking 100 people at a time to Mars. Essentially, it's designed to be a Mars Colonial transporter.
These ships that you guys are building over there.
That Dragon spacecraft, that was about the size of the thing that landed on the moon. It was pretty small.
And so the thing that would land on Mars would be...
About 100 times the size of a large SUV.
100 astronauts per trip, and a craft that is 100 times the size of a large SUV. I assume by 100 times the size, he means 100 times the volume. For comparison's sake, I'll use the Chevrolet Suburban as our reference SUV. Let's see, a Chevrolet Suburban is 5.6 meters long, 2 meters wide, and 2 meters high. That gives us a volume of 22.4 cubic meters. Multiplying that by 100 gives us 2,240 cubic meters. The question is, what shape is the spacecraft? After careful consideration, I think a design similar to Big Gemini or the Manned Orbiting Laboratory is what Musk is going for. Essentially, the nose of the spacecraft would be similar to the Dragon, but underneath that would be a very elongated pressurized trunk fixed to the spacecraft to accommodate the larger crew. So, just how big are we talking about here? Let's see, a normal Dragon is 2.9 meters high, 2.4 meters wide at the nose, and 3.6 meters wide at the base. Doing the calculations for a truncated cone gives us a volume of 20.77 cubic meters. Since the core of the MCT launcher will be 10 meters wide, we can assume that the trunk of the spacecraft will also be 10 meters wide. So we'll need another truncated cone beneath the Dragon. If we assume the height is the same as the Dragon's, then that gives us a truncated cone with a volume of 113.09 cubic meters. So the entire nose will be 133.86 cubic meters. That just leaves the trunk section. If we plug the remainder volume and 5 meter radius into the formula for the volume of the cylinder, we find that the trunk will be about 27 meters tall, with the entire spacecraft being about 32.62 meters tall. Now, I'm not sure just how much living room the astronauts will be allocated, but by comparison, a Boeing 767 has a cabin volume of about 484 cubic meters, and accommodates over 300 people. So comfortable living should not be an issue for the 100 astronauts, especially in zero gravity. For radiation shelter, if we allow the crew a sphere of 50 cubic meters, that volume can be contained within a sphere of radius 2.29 meters. Surrounding that with 2 meters of water would give the water a volume of 280 cubic meters, or a mass of 280 tons. To allow for a margin of error, I'll assume that the rest of the spacecraft, propellants included, is identical in mass to a Boeing 767, with 142 tons. That's 422 tons total. Remembering that Musk said that a rocket's payload to Mars is a quarter of its payload to the Earth, this means that sending the 422-ton MCT to Mars would require 1,266 tons of propellant. For a Mars mission, a Falcon 20 Heavy would be needed to send the MCT into Earth orbit, while a Falcon 20 Ultra Heavy would lift the Earth departure stage. For a Moon mission, because a rocket's lunar payload is only a third of its payload to Earth orbit, that means that a Falcon 20 Ultra Heavy could send the MCT and its Earth departure stage in one go. I am near certain that this will be the MCT's configuration. Structurally, it is a hybrid of a landing spacecraft and any conventional launch vehicle, and considering all the effort to achieve propulsive landings with the jettisoned rocket stages, this seems like the next logical step.